Bob Franken reporting from the Pentagon, referring to that other mission at the headquarters for the United States military, that is to carry out any action of war. The United States House of Representatives last night passed a measure that authorizes President Bush to use force against those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. There was only one vote in the House against it. It was from California Representative Barbara Lee. CNN congressional correspondent Kate Snow joins us now from the Capitol with more on this lone dissenting voice. Kate.
Well, Judy, it was a late night for the House of Representatives. They were here until about 2 in the morning this morning. They did vote last night, and it's important to point out that almost everyone voted for this resolution to use force. They are trying to give the president some backing. They are saying that he can use force against those responsible specifically for the attacks on Tuesday. The Senate had voted early yesterday morning unanimously on the same measure. But as you mentioned, there was one lone voice of dissent in the House of Representatives, and that was California Democrat Barbara Lee.
Some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control.
Lee also had some concerns shared by many of her colleagues, and that is they didn't want to give too much leeway to the president. They didn't want him to be allowed to use force in the future without having to come back to this Congress to get permission, if you will. And they think that the language they have now in this resolution provides that kind of insurance that the president would have to come back here if he wanted to go after anyone other than those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. Now, despite Lee's objections, of course, this resolution passed overwhelmingly, 420 to 1, and again, it had already passed the Senate. It is the first action like this, Judy, since the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Judy.
And Kate, some very careful language in there, making it clear that under the War Powers Act, Congress still has the right to come back, to be specific, just to clarify that.
That's right, exactly.
All right, Kate Snow at the Capitol. And now back to Darren Kagan in Atlanta. Darren.
Judy, thank you. Want to go ahead and bring up to date folks who might just be joining us, or if they're following the story, bringing you the latest developments in the attack on America. President Bush today prepared Americans for a long and sustained war. He named for the first time publicly, saying that Osama bin Laden is what he called a prime suspect. Also today, Pakistan would be a key route to any U.S. attacks on terrorist camps inside Afghanistan. Pakistan today vowing to cooperate with the U.S. The ruling Taliban of Afghanistan promised to take action against anyone helping the U.S. attack its country. Law enforcement has made the first arrest in the terror case. Others are being detained at the same time. And on the economic front, Continental Airlines is laying off 12,000 workers. The shutdown this week taking a big toll on the airline industry. Let's take a closer look now on the global support that's coming for the U.S. military, and has frankly been a groundswell of support in response to Tuesday's attacks. Some of it, in fact, coming from surprising quarters. Moscow moved closer to condoning military retaliation. Senior Russian officials say those who carried out the deadly operation should be punished, but punishment must be based on reliable facts. More now on Pakistan, which is signaling a growing willingness to work with the U.S. Pakistan, as we mentioned, pledging yesterday to fully cooperate, and its Cabinet and Security Council voting today to help the international community fight terrorism. At issue is neighboring Afghanistan, which has been known to shelter suspected terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden, which we heard President Bush name as the prime suspect in this case. Afghanistan has issued its own warning of retaliation if the U.S. launches military attacks within its borders. Of course, people on the ground in Afghanistan, we've heard, are very nervous about what might be to come. We have our own Nick Robertson on the ground there. He is in Kabul, Afghanistan. Nick, obviously it's nighttime where you are. If you can describe for us what the mood is for the people living in Kabul.
Well, certainly, Darren, people here are concerned. We have heard stories of people leaving the town, some of them trying to get out to Pakistan, others trying to go and live with relatives in the countryside. Also hearing about food prices here going up as well, perhaps 10 to 15%. Now, as part of the scenario that's going on between Afghanistan and Pakistan right now, it's looking increasingly likely that the border between the two countries could close sometime in the future. And most of the food coming to Kabul and many other parts of Afghanistan comes from Pakistan. So that is another concern of the people here, not only the possibility of attack, but also the possibility that their food resources could start drying up. So there's been some not panic buying, but certainly people trying to buy up sufficient stocks to see them through for a while. But the Taliban earlier today were really keen to try and head off the Pakistani government from deciding to assist the United States in any attack on Afghanistan. And their statement was designed specifically towards Pakistan, telling them that if the United States was to use Pakistan's airspace or soil, then they would consider that an attack by Pakistan on Afghanistan. And they warned very much that they might use an army, their own Mujahideen fighting army, they say, to move into Pakistan. This is how a Taliban spokesman laid it out.
If neighboring or regional countries, particularly Islamic countries, gave a positive response to American demand for military bases, it would spark up extraordinary danger. Similarly, if any neighboring country gave territorial way or airspace to USA against our land, it would draw us into an imposed war.
Darren, also tribal elders around the country today meeting, advising the Taliban not to close down diplomatic channels, but also saying to them, if they are attacked, all the tribes in Afghanistan would support the Taliban. Darren?
That's our Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan. Nick, thank you very much. Of course, people in Afghanistan aren't the only ones wondering about what might come next in terms of a military response from the United States, people across the U.S. and around the world as well. With more on that, let's check in with our Miles O'Brien, who's looking at different options. Miles.
Thank you very much, Darren. I'm here with General Wesley Clark, and we're just spending a little bit of time orienting ourselves on some maps we've found of Afghanistan and the surrounding regions. General Clark is our military analyst, of course, former Supreme Commander of NATO. General, first of all, before we get started into the details of what we're talking about here, I think there is an impression out there among people who've heard the debates over Pentagon spending and the need to spend more that the Pentagon and the military forces may not be at a state of readiness for something which is contemplated right now. What's your sense of it?
I think we're very, very ready. The debate about the Pentagon spending is about the future of the armed forces. We're talking about now. And we've paid a lot of attention over the years to being ready now. Could we have been more ready? Could we have had more people and more equipment? Sure, but we're in good shape.
Of course, a lot of what they're talking about is that ability to fight a two-theater type conflict, which is does not necessarily apply in this case.
That's right.
Generally speaking, as military planners think about some sort of response to this, are they thinking about big numbers, or is it more of a special forces type of approach?
Well, it's small numbers initially because we're only dealing with a network of people. We'd like to go after the specific individuals who are involved. Now, it may turn into something else, and so our planners are going to be thinking several steps down the road. If we do one thing and he does something else and then we come back again. And so we've got to be thinking about this in depth in time and depth in geography. And it's what Colin Powell said, multidimensional.
All right, now let's see if we can get this map to cooperate with us a little bit. It's a little bit...
Well, we're looking at the northern part of Afghanistan here.
All right, so the northern part, let's scroll it down just a little bit if we can. This touchscreen has to cooperate a little bit. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on 1 second. And bear with us here. While we're doing this, why don't I ask you this? Overall, how much... this is not exactly a stable region, just to help people understand exactly where we are.
This is a really...
This is the border.
Unstable, lots of refugees,
right.
Tribal. It's been racked by conflict for 20 years. It's been infiltrated with various, not only tribes that move across back and forth through these provinces and across the border, but also religious sects.
So you've got this unstable region. You've got a porous border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. As a military planner, do you have to kind of look at the region as a whole then, don't you?
You do. You have to take a big picture view of this. Now, what we would like to do, of course, is to the precise point, but you can't.
All right. This is Kabul right here, by the way, just to give you a sense of it. This is a very mountainous region, and as we consider the possibility of this scenario, you have to harken back to 1979, the Soviet invasion to Afghanistan.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about that, some of the pitfalls that were involved there. A lot of people have called that the Soviet Vietnam. What was the issue there as we look at some of these pictures?
They came in to establish a government that was more favorable to them. They put the government in power, and they reinforced it with significant military forces, conventional military forces, moved in from the north out of Soviet Asia, and moved down through avenues of approach here, occupied Kabul, and discovered, and I don't remember the exact avenues of approach, but they're going into this direction, and occupied Kabul and discovered then that controlling the capital is not the same as controlling the country. They fell into the plight of
Miles, I'm sorry. My apologies to you and to the General. I want to just jump in here a second. We have some breaking news taking place in Midtown Manhattan. This is near the Javits Center, where thousands of people have shown up to volunteer only to be turned away. Our Bill Hemmer is on the scene there. Bill, what do you have?
Yeah, Darren, thank you, and hello to you also. The police commissioner about, I'd say 90 minutes ago made the word official, and it just spread to the area here where thousands had hoped to gather so their services could be used to volunteer. The police department came by just about 5 minutes ago and made the announcement. This is how that went down a short time ago.
But due to the overabundance of iron workers and everybody, there's no further need today for your type of skills. We thank you, but you have to go home. Just be advised, please keep advised of the TV and see what they need. But right now, there's no further need for any type of volunteer construction workers.
And clearly a wave of disappointment quickly swept over this crowd. Again, thousands of people had converged on here. They're leaving in droves at this point. A number of people said they're just going to start walking downtown and see what they can do eventually when they get there. Jason Harrison, is it, Jason? A firefighter who came in from the state of Michigan near Fleet and Hadley Township. You were in the construction site in the rubble last night. Yeah. You're not going to get a chance today. How do you feel?
I don't know. It's kind of sickened. I mean, it's horrible down there. You know, a lot of you know, dead bodies. The smell is really bad.
Why'd you come here, Jason?
Just to try to help. I didn't want to stay at home and just sit on my hands, you know, and say, well, I wish there was something I could do. You know, I thought I'd just, you know, I could get up and go help.
What about tomorrow? Do you hold out hope that you might be able to contribute then?
I'm not sure. I gotta go back to work on Monday, so I don't know. We haven't decided yet. I'm down here with another guy, so we have to kind of decide together.
Okay, listen, best of luck to you. Thanks for stopping by. Jason Harrison, a fire department official here, a firefighter, I should say, more correctly, who's come to Manhattan to help out in any way he can. Quickly, Darren, I want to let you know, the word's going out once again. They need respirators, especially the kind with the replaceable canisters. They need hard hats with lights. They need welding equipment, welding gloves as well. They need flashlights and batteries. They're saying they don't need any food or any water, but prayers indeed are appreciated at any point. And Governor Pataki expected on the scene here just about a half block from where we are at this point. Darren?
Bill, question on the supplies you say they need. Let's say someone in Iowa or California or Florida is watching and wants to actually physically send that stuff. Where do they send it to?
The information we're getting, Darren, again, this is a little loose at this point, but what we're being told, Shea Stadium out in Flushing Meadow, open 24 hours a day for all non-perishable products. Giant Stadium across the river here in New Jersey, they're saying from noon to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, of course, all non-perishables as well. But I'm also told that a lot of these places are filling up quickly here. Rich, if you want to take us over here, we showed you this throughout the morning. This is, Darren, this is just one small sample, and believe me, just one small sample of the enormous input. I mean, people talk about American generosity. Well, it has not only bubbled, but it has burst here as well. I mean, there is so much water and so much food here. And again, this is just a small portion, just about a block from where we are located here. There are several large tents that have all this material inside of them. And again, that's why the word's going out. They don't need any more of this, but the items I mentioned again, especially those respirators with the replaceable canisters, to make sure that the rescuers that are in the rubble can indeed continue their work. They also mentioned things like insoles and foot powder and vapor rub as well, and also goggles to wear over the eyes to make sure the dust keeps out. So that's the urgent need at this point, and they're hoping that a lot of folks can come through at this point as well.
Bill Hemmer in Midtown Manhattan. Bill, thank you very much. It sounds like it's going to be a frustrating early afternoon for folks showing up, wanting to help, and yet the biggest thing they can do is a thing that will be so hard, and it sounds like from police, just go home and continue to hope and pray. Let's take it up to Judy in Washington, D.C. Judy?
Darren, so many pieces of the story we're following over at the Pentagon, just on the other side of the Potomac River. Rescue recovery crews working on getting the debris out of there. We are told they're on top of the building now, lifting some large pieces, which could be parts of that 757, which came into the Pentagon on Tuesday morning, an American flight. And we're trying, along with you, to get a better look at exactly what the crews are doing. As you can see, they put support beams up there to support them as they take these pieces out, literally one by one. And like New York, they've been working around the clock. Back in New York City, the service for the chaplain for the New York City Fire Department is just about to wrap up. Father Michael Judge was the chaplain. He was, in fact, administering the last rites to, we presume, an emergency worker when he lost his own life. This is at the Cathedral of St. Francis Assisi in New York. A little while ago, we heard New York Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton speaking there, describing what happened to him as unimaginable, talking along with others about the many, many lives that Father Judge had touched. Someone who must have had a personal relationship with everyone in that fire department. Nearby in Long Island, in Farmingdale, Long Island, memorial service for Fire Chief Peter Gansey. This is a man who had come up through the ranks at the fire department, spent over 30 years, literally had held every position there was to hold in the New York City Fire Department, had risen to the rank of fire chief, and he was there on the job, doing his job, when the World Trade Center collapsed. As we watch these pictures that are so hard for all of us, joining us is Russell Friedman, who is a grief counselor. He's joining us from Los Angeles. Russell Friedman, your career is spent consoling people who are dealing with enormous loss, like the people we're seeing here this morning. What's the first thing you try to do when you are talking with someone who has suffered such an incredible loss?
Great question, Judy. The most important thing to do in creating communication about loss is to go first and tell the truth about yourself. Nobody likes being interrogated, and especially about feelings. So it's real important for me to say, I've been having the same human reaction, and in doing that, it opens up so that people can tell me the truth about themselves.
Why is that important?
Because if not, they don't feel safe. I could do something, it sounds a little humorous here, but almost anybody listening who's married, if honey says, "What's wrong, honey?" almost everybody says nothing. And that's with someone you love and trust. The problem is we feel judged. If we say we feel bad, then someone automatically says, "Don't feel bad, tomorrow's another day." So if I tell the truth and then I get told not to feel the way I feel, which is also absurd, because if you telling me not to feel bad is going to fix me, I wouldn't have needed to tell you in the first place. I could have just told myself not to feel bad. So safety is real important here. And this week, safety is the primary emotional issue. We are fearful of everything. So we need to feel safe enough to tell the truth about how we feel, especially about being scared.
Russell Friedman is executive director of the Grief Recovery Institute in Los Angeles. Is there something different, Mr. Friedman, about what people are feeling under these kinds of circumstances where there were so many lives lost in such a horrific act of terrorism from any other death?
Yes and no. Those of us who are not directly involved, who did not have people in the airplanes or in the buildings, we're experiencing quite a different phenomenon. In the first place, everything we are familiar with in our existence changed between Monday and Tuesday. We've experienced a loss of safety, a loss of trust, and a loss of control. But more than that, Judy, the tremendous emotion comes from another idea, and the idea is this. When this loss occurs, it makes you think about every loss you've ever had in your life. It triggers your memory to identify feelings of sadness. And in that sadness, you go back to a dog that died when you were a child, or your grandma, and so on.
Yes, hi.
Russell Friedman, if you could just stay with us for a moment. Brian Nelson joins us. He is outside St. Francis Assisi Church in New York, where they've been holding a service for the chaplain of the New York Fire Department, Father Michael Judge. Brian?
Thank you, Judy. It's a very moving moment out here in the streets of New York. This is 31st Street, and on one side of the street, the Church of St. Francis of Assisi, where the funeral services just concluded for Father Michael Judge. He was the chaplain of the New York City Fire Department. As you may be able to see on screen now, there are hundreds of New York City firemen lining this street. They're in front of 24 Hook and Ladder Station, right across the street. He was probably most personally known by every one of these men and women in this fire department, but he catered right across the city to all the firemen. And
he was there on the scene. He died because he was there to be part of what his men were doing.
What we heard this morning, Judy, was that he had received word that there was trouble down at the World Trade Center, and they said that Father Judge, your services are probably going to be needed. He changed from his habit into his fire uniform and jumped in his car and raced down. And he was there to minister and administer last rites to a fireman who had been killed by one of the bodies, one of the people who had jumped from the tower, one of the two towers, as the fires engulfed the middle floors. And as he was administering last rites, he himself died. And we heard a moving description of how firemen retrieved his body from the rubble and carried it to a nearby church. And they laid him on the altar of a church, and there he rested safely as they went back to work. This is just a very moving moment. This service has lasted over 2 hours. In attendance, former President Bill Clinton, New York's junior Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, and their daughter Chelsea. The funeral cortege now beginning to move out. The funeral cortege now about to move out, and you just witnessed a last salute to Father Michael Judge, the chaplain to the New York City Fire Department, and his helmet placed into the hearse alongside the casket. He has been the chaplain of the New York Fire Department for 10 years, and he is the first to have died, I'm told, in the line of duty. He was 68 years old, and the stories about him, many professional, him helping members of the fire department, especially across the street at 24 Hook and Ladder, those people who knew him best, with their personal problems, problems with wives and girlfriends, problems with sick children. We heard a story of him visiting a fireman's sick child in hospital every single day until the child was released. He's loved everywhere in this city. We hear stories of him walking around the streets of New York with money in his pocket and discreetly handing it out to the homeless who he encounters along the way. A man of a generous heart and great tolerance, and for whom the events down at the World Trade Center on Tuesday, I am told, would just be shocking. It's just horrible. Now, this is the first of New York's funerals from the disaster at the World Trade Center. There are two others who will be buried today. They are both firemen who lost their lives. And we will probably see hundreds, if not thousands, of funerals similar to this as the days and weeks roll on, as the authorities and the rescuers retrieve remains of the deceased at the site and identify the bodies and return them to families. This is just the start of what is going to be a very, very tragic and heartfelt period in American history. Judy?
Brian Nelson at this conclusion of a memorial service, as Brian was saying, for chaplain Father Michael Judge, the chaplain for the New York Fire Department. And Brian, you're absolutely right. This is just the beginning. The grief flows on and on. And back to you, Russell Friedman, grief counselor in Los Angeles. These funerals, obviously most of them being held in a house of worship. To what extent is religion some element of spirituality, of comfort to family and loved ones in these times?
Well, for those whose faith has not been breached, it is of tremendous comfort. We also have to address the fact that this kind of situation puts us all in question. I'm sure you've seen the same programs I have, where the questions of how can this happen test everyone's faith. What we believe is that in addition to any faith anyone has, which is tremendously helpful, they need tremendous emotional skills to deal with this, because as well as being a spiritual event, it's the most massive emotional upheaval in this country. We have a collective broken heart, and the heart and the spirit are connected. So those who can use spiritual tools, boy, is that a big benefit at this point in time.
So when you say whose faith has not been breached, you mean because of just the sheer how difficult it is to believe that God would let something like this happen?
Exactly. As human beings, we ask those questions. I watched several clergy of various faiths this week on the television nationally addressing that issue. And it's an age-old question, and it sure comes up now. Our position is that no matter what your beliefs or what the position of your beliefs are today, your heart is broken. Everything that was familiar in your life Monday is no longer familiar. And you have to address all of your being, both the intellectual, the spiritual, and the emotional. Of course, what we do is it addresses the emotional. And of course, my biggest concern, Judy, at the Grief Recovery Institute is for the children, because everyone is calling us saying, how do we talk to our children? So if we have a moment, I'd like to, if you and I can talk about that a little, I think it might help a lot of people watching.
Russell Friedman, who heads the Grief Recovery Institute in Los Angeles, has written about grief and recovery and written about children grieving. And of course, many, many families, many children are affected by this week's tragedies.
If I may say, Judy, one of the things that happened earlier this week, I was sitting in a makeup chair before going on a TV show, and I was talking to the young makeup woman who had an 8-year-old daughter. And the prior night, Tuesday night of the event, the daughter told the mommy she was scared. So I said to the mommy, did you tell her you were scared too? And she said no. And I said very gently, gosh, "Why would you lie to her?" She said, "What did you mean?" I said, "Your daughter responds to your body language. She probably knows